Dr. Martens are a boot heavily associated to music and counterculture. Known for their ties to the punk and grunge scenes, as well as their depressing association to neo-Nazis, even those not concerned with fashion at all know about these boots. But how did they get to be the fashion staple that they are today? Join me as we dive into the history of Dr. Martens. Hey everyone, and welcome to the History of Fashion. So today we're going to be talking about Dr. Martens. I've got mine on. I just have the shoes. I don't actually own the classic boots. So yeah, I guess I'm just going to jump right into it. To explore the history of these boots, we're going to have to look at two separate histories that came together to create the iconic boot. So the first history is of the Griggs group, and the second one is the story of a man named Dr. Klaus Martens. So in 1901, what would eventually be known as the Griggs Company was founded. This was when Benjamin Griggs and Septimus Jones came together in Northamptonshire, England, to create high-quality footwear for the working class. They eventually went their separate ways, and Griggs brought his son Sebastian on board. Over the following decades, Griggs boots became known for their durability and sturdiness. This continued into the early 50s when Goodyear welt stitching was added to the boots. This made the quality even greater and greatly sped up manufacturing time. Essentially, Goodyear welt stitching is a manufacturing process where the top of the shoe is attached to the sole through a welt, which is a reinforcing strip of material, usually leather. The stitching required to do this is quite complex and was made much quicker and more available by Goodyear's machine. However, it wasn't until the late 50s that Doc Martens came into the picture. By 1960, the Griggs Company reached an agreement with the inventors and began selling a boot featuring yellow stitching built around the innovative sole. This was first done in Britain and then eventually internationally. And this boot was known as the 1460, which they still sell today, and this was based on the date that it was created. Of course, this is only half the story. Next, we're going to talk about Martens and Funk and how they created the rubber sole that these boots are known for. The story of the rubber sole starts with a 25-year-old German doctor named Klaus Martens. I feel it's important to state that Klaus was a military doctor and soldier for the Germans in World War II. So yes, he was a Nazi. I couldn't really find any info other than that about this phase of his life, so I'm going to leave it there. But it's something worth noting as we continue through the history of these boots. In 1945, at the tail end of the war, Klaus was on holiday skiing when he fell and injured his foot. During the recovery period, he found it very painful to walk with his current footwear. With some help from a German engineer named Herbert Funk, he created a unique sole made of rubber sealed around numerous air pockets. The duo patented the invention and began selling shoes including this comfortable sole in Germany, with the first customers being German soldiers with foot and leg problems, like Martens himself. Eventually, these shoes were selling so well that an industrial partner was needed to help produce them, and this is what led to the partnership between Martens and Funk and the Griggs group. With these two stories converging, we have basically seen how Dr. Martens came to be, except for the name. So basically, there was a big anti-German sentiment following World War II in Britain, which is where the Griggs Company was located and where they were planning on selling these boots. So to make the name less German, they changed it to Dr. Martens. So originally it was Dr. Martens. So by the time these boots entered mass production, they were already selling well. But they would soon enter the mainstream as an iconic fashion piece, which is something completely unexpected from the boots' creators. So originally, 1460s were worn by those that they were made for, manual laborers who were on their feet for hours at a time, primarily miners and factory workers. Griggs also added this sole to some of their regular non-boot shoes, bringing Docs to another class of people, post office and subway workers. That's the one I'm wearing today. Wow. However, it didn't take long for two youth subcultures to begin wearing 1460s, transforming them into a boot that was not just functional, but fashionable as well. The groups in question were the Mods, which was a counterculture movement brought to light by bands like The Who, and skinheads. It's worth noting here that these skinheads were not just the neo-Nazi fucks that we think of today. The skinhead movement was kind of just started as an anti-establishment movement with varying goals, some of them even anti-racist. The skinhead look and the term were reappropriated by neo-Nazis. So this continued into the 1970s as these subcultures diverted into various subcultures. While the looks and ideologies changed, Docs remained a central part of many of their uniforms. It was also in the 1970s that Docs became popular within the LGBTQ community. And there's some speculation as how this came about. Some sources I found suggested that it was due to their traditionally masculine appearance. Others said it's just because a lot of people in the LGBT community at this time felt they needed to kind of like wear protective clothing based on the abuse they got from society. I figured I would just share a couple of the explanations that I found online. In the late 70s into the 80s, 1460s became part of many punk-based subculture identities, with many people now customizing their boots with paint and safety pins. This is also when the boots began to really break into the international markets. As punk movements spread around the world, so did punk fashion, Docs included. So finally, in the late 80s into the 90s, the grunge scene spread to the mainstream. And while grunge music borrowed from punk, so did grunge fashion. This tie to punk, alongside the workwear-inspired clothes worn by members of the grunge subculture, made 1460s an integral part of the uniform. And this is really what rocketed Dr. Martens' sales in America and brought the boots to a mainstream audience, because the grunge subculture really became like a mainstream subculture. But following this boost, the boots actually wavered in popularity in the late 90s into the very early 2000s. But this wouldn't last long, and by 2003, high fashion designers started bringing the boot back to the mainstream. So basically, today Dr. Martens have remained a boot embraced by many. On top of their adoption by mainstream fashion, the boot has managed somehow to stay cool within countless subcultures. And with the current 90s revival that we're seeing today in youth fashion, Docs have become perhaps more popular than ever before. So that's my little episode on the history of Doc Martens. I hope you enjoyed. I would really appreciate it if you enjoyed the video, if you took a minute to share it with some people that might be interested. Definitely leave in the comments if you have other suggestions. This was actually one of the suggestions I got on the history of flannel shirts. There's more history of fashion. I've got a playlist on my channel. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye, everyone.